Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Piramal Pharma Limited, or PPL.
Right.
This is a really fascinating company,
Yeah.
sitting right at that intersection of finance and pharmaceuticals.
Exactly.
And we're asking, how has PPL, navigating this really capital-intensive sector, how have they not only weathered recent sort of economic headwinds, but actually strategically positioned themselves for some pretty significant growth, especially in that CDMO segment?
Yeah, the contract development and manufacturing organization side. And to help you get a really comprehensive understanding without, drowning in data, we've pulled together insights from a few key places.
Okay.
There's a recent CARE ratings report that's from March 2025.
Yeah.
Then a deep dive from Goldman Sachs, their takeaways from an India CDMO tour they did in June 2025.
Right.
And another report just highlighting the company's sort of diversified growth strategy.
Okay, so a good mix of sources.
Yeah.
And why this matters to you listening is, well, it's pretty simple, really. PPL operates in these absolutely critical areas of the global pharma industry. We're talking drug development, manufacturing, essential hospital generics, even consumer products you might see on the shelf.
That's right.
So understanding their path, their trajectory, really offers valuable insights into, well, market dynamics, innovation, and also risk management in a sector that, let's face it, impacts global health directly.
Absolutely. So maybe let's kick things off with the big picture, the financials. What does that CARE ratings report actually tell us?
Good place to start.
Well, they've reaffirmed PPL's long-term rating at CARE, which is strong. But what's really interesting, I think, is the positive outlook.
Ah, okay. So not just stable, but expecting improvement.
Exactly. That positive tag suggests they anticipate things will continue to get better.
A positive outlook, especially now, that feels like a strong signal. What's driving that confidence? What are the key financial improvements they're seeing?
It boils down to a couple of really significant things. First, a big boost in their P&L margins. That's profit before interest, lease rentals, depreciation, and taxation.
Right. The core profitability metric.
Precisely. Those margins climbed from about 10% in fiscal year 23 way up to 15% in FY24.
Wow, that's a jump.
It is. And they've held steady at 15% in the first 9 months of FY25, too.
Right.
And this isn't just, a number on a page. It strongly suggests PPL's pivot towards those higher value, more specialized CDMO services is really working. It's paying off.
Yeah, that 5-point margin improvement, that definitely stands out. Beyond that, I gather they've also been pretty smart about managing their debt.
They have, yeah, very strategic. Their total debt came down quite a bit.
How much are we talking?
Well, it went from around 537 crore at the end of March 2023 down to 4,710 crore by March 2024.
Okay, that's a decent reduction. How'd they manage that?
Largely through a successful race issue. That was back in Q2 of FY24.
Okay, raise capital.
Yep, brought in about 150 crore. And that allowed them to directly repay 859 crore of debt.
Right. So for you listening, the bottom line is their financial health is clearly improving.
Exactly. Key ratios look better, too. Overall gearing, that improved from 0.83 times down to 0.60 times.
Better leverage.
And the P-bill-ED interest coverage ratio, that moved up from 2.15 times to 2.71 times in FY24. Basically, they're in a much stronger financial position, better able to handle their debt, which is, critical in a capital-hungry industry like pharma.
Makes sense. And it sounds like they're not just cutting debt, they're also keeping a decent amount of cash on hand.
Absolutely. Liquidity looks strong. They're holding somewhere between, say, 500 to 600 crore in cash and liquid balances.
Okay.
Plus, on top of that, they've got another 600 crore in unused working capital lines as of March 31st, 2024. So yeah, a very healthy financial cushion there.
Okay, so financials improving, good liquidity.
Yeah.
Given all that, it really feels like the engine behind this recovery is, well, one main area.
Yeah.
That CDMO segment.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting.
What's making it such a powerful driver for their sales and profit recovery?
Well, the CDMO segment has shown a really strong comeback, especially in commercial manufacturing.
Okay.
That part alone saw an increase of roughly 500 crore in revenue in FY24.
That's substantial.
Mhm.
What's behind that surge?
It seems to be fueled by a couple of things. One, a gradual sort of recovery in biotech funding globally. That helps.
Right, more investment flowing.
And crucially, the commercialization of more molecules. Drugs that PPL helped develop in the earlier phases are now hitting the market.
So as the drugs they worked on get approved and go commercial, PPL sees the benefit. Makes sense. Is that momentum keeping up?
It looks like it. The CDMO segment reported high-teen revenue growth in the first 9 months of FY25.
High teens, okay.
And Care Ratings, they're projecting PPL's overall sales for the full year FY25 will increase by maybe 10–15%,
Right.
with potentially another 100 to 200 basis points improvement in those T-bill DT margins we talked about.
So continued growth and margin expansion expected.
Yeah. And what looks particularly promising for the future pipeline is that roughly 34% of PPL's current development revenue in CDMO, it comes from molecules that are already in phase 3 trials.
Phase 3, so late stage.
Exactly. That means there's a very high probability, statistically speaking, that a good chunk of those will transition to commercial production. That suggests a strong future flow of business.
That is a strong indicator.
Yeah.
But, even with that promising pipeline, I know Goldman Sachs flagged a potential, maybe near-term speed bump for CDMO.
They did, yeah. It's
Yeah.
important context. Goldman acknowledged that sales from PPL's single largest CDMO product, they're expected to be a bit subdued in FY26.
Subdued. Why is that?
Primarily inventory destocking by a key customer, just working through existing stock.
Okay, so that might mean the CDMO segment sees sort of flattish revenue that specific year, FY26.
Potentially, yes. Flattish for the segment overall in FY26 is a possibility because of that one large product. But, and this is key, they anticipate a strong rebound in FY27.
Okay, what drives the rebound?
That's expected to come from various multi-year supply orders kicking in, and also just the normalization of supplies for that big drug after the destocking period.
It's interesting how PPL frames their relationship with that drug, though. They see themselves as the primary supplier, right? Having been involved since the early stages.
Yeah, they emphasize that. They worked on it back in phase 2 and 3 with the original biotech company.
Which then got acquired by Pfizer, I think.
That's the one. So they have that long-standing connection.
Okay, so even if FY26 is flat for that one product, where else is CDMO growth expected to come from that year?
Well, they're expecting growth from specific facilities ramping up. Places like Grangemouth, Riverview, Sellersville, Lexington, and Digwall. They're seeing utilization increase there.
Right.
And beyond just general capacity, PPL is strategically focusing on what they call advanced modalities.
Okay, like what?
Things like antibody-drug conjugates, ADCs, that segment seems to be thriving. They mentioned robust demand, strong relationships with big pharma clients.
AECs are definitely a hot area.
They are, and PPL's investing there. They've added 2 new manufacturing suites specifically for larger ADC batches in Grangemouth. And they apparently have capacity to add 2 more if needed. So ADCs and also high-potency active pharmaceutical ingredients, HPAPIs, both of those are expected to grow faster than the company average.
So a real focus on these high-growth complex areas.
Exactly.
And looking further out, they've set a pretty ambitious target for the CDMO business, haven't they? For FY30.
They have indeed. Management seems quite confident about doubling CDMO revenues by FY30.
Doubling. That's ambitious.
It is, but what's quite noteworthy is how they say they're forecasting it. Apparently, it's quite conservative.
How so?
Well, they're only modeling about a 50% success rate for their phase 3 pipeline actually making it to market.
Okay, that seems prudent given clinical trial risks.
Right. And they're also only assuming about 50% of the potential revenue they could get from customers currently in their sort of prospect pipeline.
So they're building in quite a buffer. Kind of an under-promise, over-deliver approach.
That seems to be the idea. It gives them a potentially more solid foundation for hitting that ambitious doubling target.
Okay, so CDMO is clearly the main growth engine, that's clear. But PPL's overall strength, its business profile, it's actually backed by a few different segments, right? It's not just CDMO.
That's a very important point. Diversification is key here. You've got CDMO, then complex hospital generics, which they often call critical care, and also consumer healthcare, the over-the-counter or OTC business.
Right. Let's touch on the complex hospital generics, the CHG part first. How significant are they there?
They're actually a pretty major global player in certain niches. For instance, they're the 4th largest producer of inhaled anesthetics in the world.
The 4th largest. Okay, that's significant.
Yeah, and they have a broad presence with their hospital generics, generally active in over 100 countries.
Wow.
And a key development recently is their expanded sevoflurane capacity. That's a common inhaled anesthetic. That capacity is now online.
Okay, so positioning for growth there too.
Exactly. It's a smart move, setting them up to grab more market share, particularly in what they call rest of world markets. Think outside the US and Western Europe.
Right, where demand might be growing faster.
Potentially. And Registrations in new regions, they take time, maybe 6 to 18 months typically, but they see key opportunities in places like Latin America, Indonesia, France, Germany, and India itself.
Okay. And what about the consumer healthcare side, the OTC business? How does that piece fit in?
The OTC segment, it's run on a pretty asset-light model,
Meaning?
meaning they don't own massive manufacturing plants specifically for it.
Hmm.
It allows them to be more agile, maybe more responsive to consumer trends.
Makes sense. What kind of products?
Oh, a diverse range. Skincare, vitamins, antacids, pain relief analgesics, gastrointestinal products, even baby care.
A broad portfolio.
Very broad.
Yeah.
And they leverage a huge distribution network across India. We're talking over 4 lakh distributors, reaching like 1.8 lakh chemists and cosmetic shops, plus over 10,000 modern trade outlets like supermarkets.
That's extensive reach.
Yeah, and they use celebrity endorsements too to build brand awareness, efficiently.
And profitability in OTC.
Currently, it's in the low single digits. The margins aren't huge yet, but the expectation is that as sales increase and they gain scale, those margins should improve quite a bit.
Okay. So across all these segments, CDMO, CHG, OTC, it sounds like they have a genuinely global footprint and a wide customer base.
That's definitely right. PPL has a strong presence in the big regulated markets, US, UK, but also in semi-regulated ones like Japan, Africa, Asia.
Right.
If you look at FY24 revenue, about 70% came from those tightly regulated markets.
Which implies high-quality standards.
Yeah, it does. And within CDMO specifically, the customer base is really diversified. Roughly 64% of their revenue there comes from big pharma and what they call emerging biopharma.
Okay.
And again, 70% of that CDMO revenue is from regulated markets. Plus, a lot of their CDMO contracts are long-term, maybe 3 to 5 years, which adds a layer of stability to their revenue.
That's a strong operational base. And it sounds like it's underpinned by some pretty experienced leadership, too. The Piramal family is still heavily involved.
Oh, very much so. PPL benefits hugely from that deep experience.
Yeah.
You have Ajay Piramal, and Nandini Piramal is chairman of PPL, working alongside the CEO, Peter DeYoung.
Right.
The family group has, over 3 decades in the pharma business? That brings a lot of strategic depth, especially in such a dynamic industry.
Yeah, that long-term view must be valuable. And their manufacturing facilities, I assume, are top-notch.
Yeah.
Given that regulated market focus.
They seem to be. World-class, definitely. They operate 17 manufacturing and development sites across India, the US, the UK, Canada, even have a sourcing office in Shanghai.
Okay.
And crucially, these facilities hold approvals from all the major global regulatory bodies, US FDA, UK MHRA, Japan's PMDA, Brazil's Anvisa, Health Canada. You need those to play in the big leagues.
Absolutely. Which brings us nicely to their compliance track record. It sounds pretty good overall, but I think there was a recent update.
It is historically a very impressive track record. Really strong. Think about this. Since FY12, they've successfully cleared 44 US FDA audits.
44?
Yeah. And 341 total regulatory inspections from various agencies, plus over 1,700 customer inspections.
Okay.
And historically, they've had 0 official action indicated or OAI outcomes from those US FDA audits, which is, frankly, remarkable in this industry. Very few can claim that.
That's a huge asset. So what was the recent update?
Well, in February 2025, the US FDA did conclude a GMP, or Good Manufacturing Practices, inspection at their facility in Turba, India, and they issued 6 observations.
6 observations. Okay. What happens now?
PPL's management is currently preparing their response to the FDA. They've emphasized, their absolute commitment to maintaining the highest compliance standards. It's something to watch, but given their history, you'd expect them to address it thoroughly.
Right. That strong track record definitely helps build confidence.
Yeah.
But, this raises an important question. What are the key weaknesses or risks PPL is actually navigating right now? Can't all be smooth sailing.
No, definitely not. And they're quite open about some of the challenges. One of the big ones is just the capital-intensive nature of this business.
Building all those facilities costs money.
Exactly. And it's combined with the issue of initial underutilization of some of that capacity.
Meaning they built it, but it's not running full yet.
Precisely. PPL undertook significant debt-funded expansions between FY21 and FY23. That led to high fixed costs.
Right.
And when sales were initially a bit lower, or certain facilities weren't running at full capacity, especially some formulation plants, apparently the API plants run pretty full. That impacted margins.
It's like building a huge new highway, knowing traffic will come eventually, but for a while you've got empty lanes.
That's a great analogy. PPL is kind of in that phase, growing into its expanded capacity. Utilization is expected to improve over the next, say, 2, 3 years, but it's definitely a key thing to keep an eye on.
Okay, so growing into the capacity is one challenge. What about wider external market risks?
Those are certainly factors too. We mentioned biotech funding. It's been tougher in recent years, though showing signs of life now. That impacts the whole industry.
Sure.
And while customers are interested in this China plus one idea, diversifying supply chains away from just China,
De-risking.
yeah, de-risking. But some companies are still hesitant to make big disruptive changes right now, especially if funding is still a bit uncertain for them.
So the trend is there, but maybe adoption is cautious.
Could be. Then you've got exposure to risks like raw material price volatility.
Always an issue in manufacturing.
Right. Although they try to mitigate some of that in their CDMO contracts and,
Sure.
of course, foreign exchange risk.
Big one for exporters.
Yeah. Huge. Around 80% of their FY24 revenue came from exports. They do hedge about 45–55% of that exposure, but it's still a risk.
Okay. And did Goldman Sachs point out any other specific risks?
Yeah, they also highlighted things like customer or product concentration being too reliant on a few big ones, clinical attrition risk, which is just the inherent risk that drugs fail in trials, even late-stage ones.
Right, impacting that pipeline.
Exactly. And potential delays in ramping up production at key plants, just operational hurdles.
Okay. So a fair few challenges and risks to manage. But despite all that, PPL has set these quite ambitious targets for FY30, which you mentioned they reiterated to Goldman Sachs. Remind us what those long-term goals are.
They're definitely aiming high. The goals for FY30 are doubling revenues compared to now,
Doubling revenues.
tripling their EBITDA.
Tripling profit, essentially.
Or operating profit, yeah.
Yeah.
And significantly reducing their net debt to EBITDA ratio down to about 1x.
1x net debt to EBITDA. That'd
Yeah.
be very healthy.
Extremely healthy. And the plan to achieve this, it relies heavily on operating and financial leverage. Basically, as they fill up those highway lanes, as plant utilization increases across their network, the profitability should improve dramatically.
Right, getting more revenue out of the assets they've already built.
That's the core idea, drive efficiency and scale.
Okay, so pulling this all together then, what does this all mean for you listening? You've just taken quite a deep dive into Piramal Pharma Limited.
Yeah.
And we've seen a company that has, well, pretty successfully navigated some significant challenges to really improve its financial health.
Driven largely, as we saw, by that powerful rebound in its core CDMO segment.
Right. But we've also seen how their diversified portfolio in critical care and consumer health, combined with that robust global manufacturing footprint, and importantly, very experienced leadership, how that all positions them quite strongly for future growth.
Definitely. Even while they openly acknowledge and seem to be actively addressing the challenges, the capital intensity, the need to ramp up utilization, and those ongoing market and regulatory risks we discussed.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
Given the sort of undeniable global demand for pharmaceutical innovation and for reliable, resilient supply chains, and considering PPL's strategic investments in these high-growth areas like ADCs, plus those aggressive FY30 targets,
Yeah.
how might their quite measured, almost conservative approach to forecasting their own pipeline success, how might it actually serve as a powerful differentiator for them? Could that caution ultimately help them achieve more sustainable long-term growth in this really competitive pharma landscape? Something to think about.